Dune 2 is electrifying audiences with a near-perfect score on Rotten Tomatoes from both critics and audiences alike. In addition to that, Dune 2 is looking to have about an $82 million opening weekend here in the US and Canada, with another $80 million or so coming from international box offices. But the big question on a lot of people's minds, I'm sure, is, hey, Valiant, how come an $82 million opening weekend for a movie like Dune is good, but a $100 million opening weekend for a Marvel movie is bad? Well, we're going to explain it right now. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Make sure to join us every Sunday afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern right here for the live show. As per Deadline Magazine and Anthony D'Alessandro, Dune Part 2, how Sci-Fi space worm epic reared head to $81.5 million opening after strike release delay. With a near social media draw of $600 million, bolstered by Zendaya, Dave Bautista, Timothée Chalamet, Florence Pugh, and Austin Butler, the move for Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers distributed Dune Part 2 from the strike-stricken desert of the first weekend of November to early March has yielded an $81.5 million opening. Intelligence says that translates to 5.2 million admissions for 70% of the weekend's entire foot traffic. So let's break that number down right off the bat. 5.2 million estimated admissions, according to Intelligence, with an $81 to $82 million box office. That would suggest the average retail ticket price paid here in the US and Canada was approaching $16 per ticket. Now, what that tells us is not only, of course, has inflation driven the costs up, but what's more important for this is that it does seem that people are driving into premium large format screens and IMAX. We saw a few days ago the amount of IMAX tickets and IMAX screenings and the dollar revenue from IMAX that was coming in Thursday and Friday, and that has continued through the weekend. People want to go see this on the biggest screen possible to get the best experience they can, and that's making this movie a lot of money. Intelligence also says most people went to see Dune 2 between the hours of 5 and 8 p.m., 33%, followed by 1 to 5 p.m., 31%, where the tickets would be a little bit cheaper. 8 p.m. and later, 19%, and those before 1 p.m. repped 17% of admissions. The box office data organization also reports that family groups came out more on Saturday, and their activity was much higher with the more economically priced standard format, with an average price of $13.94 overall per ticket versus a premium average ticket price of $17.43. And the weighted combination of those two, standard versus PLF, and that's where we're getting a near $16 average ticket price for this film. Dune 2 posted a $28 million Saturday rep, which suggests that Denis Villeneuve's space opera is headed to an $80 million stateside. This was from Saturday night, last night. And Nancy Tartaglione pegs the international and global box office total to about $160 million all combined worldwide. Saturday's bigger than box office rival Oppenheimer from last year, which turned in a $26.2 million Saturday, and Five Nights at Freddy's with $24.2. D'Alessandro is on the right track, and I'm with him. I think that Dune 2 is going to look more like an Oppenheimer performance than a Marvel movie performance, and that's where the difference comes in with opening weekend. Oppenheimer opened with around $80 million and then legged out to about a 4x run in the domestic box office. Now, I don't know if Dune Part 2 can quite get to 4x, although it's certainly within the realm of possibility, but let's say it even settles out to somewhere around a 3x. That would be greatly more than what we usually see with Marvel fare. Marvel movies tend to come out, and within the first 4 to 6 days, generally speaking, 50% of its total box office is already banked. They're very front-loaded. But Dune was very different. Let me show you. Dune 2 has an excellent 80% definite recommend and an 80% definitely see in theater ranking from audiences. On Friday, close to half of the audience bought their ticket the day of, indicating a very strong amount of walk-up business. That is incredibly different from what we usually see with a big Marvel blockbuster. Marvel movies, especially as the years have gone on, have become far more heavily front-loaded into ticket pre-sales. We see pre-sale figures for Marvel movies come in very hot right out of the gate and then quickly dwindle, and the walk-up traffic tends to almost disappear by comparison to something like Dune. That means that the people who really want to see Marvel movies buy their tickets well in advance, and not many other people really show up beyond that point. In the case of Dune, it had strong pre-sales, but the walk-up traffic continued to be strong, meaning the people that bought their tickets the day they went to go see the movie, they decided because of word of mouth. And I think that's going to continue over the next several weeks as the movie builds positive momentum with audiences around the globe. And of course, as I'm recording this, newer numbers come in, and those are the international. You can see here the domestic is still hanging at 81.5, and I would not be at all surprised by the time we get actual numbers on Monday that might be a million or two higher, because that's been the trend since Thursday night. The international box office is now being slated at around 97 million. That's sharply higher than the 80 million or so that Tartaglione was expecting last night. That's obviously now been updated, and once again, that number could very easily push over 100 by the time actuals come in. And that doesn't include China. Let's look back to the first Dune movie from a couple of years ago to get a sense of where this could wind up. Dune of 2021 only had $109 million at the domestic box office. That, of course, was thanks in large part to HBO and Warner Brothers deciding to go day and date release on what was then HBO Max. That was the Jason Kilar-helmed Project Popcorn at Warner Brothers, and it didn't turn out so well. It definitely had a tremendous negative impact on the box office performance of this film, one that Legendary was none too happy with. And if you recall, we reported at the time that Warner Brothers, in addition to Dune, also had to deal with Legendary on the Godzilla vs. Kong movie that came out earlier that year. Warner Brothers had to pay Legendary hundreds of millions of dollars to make this day-and-date release move. They didn't do that this time, thank God. They're going to give Dune a proper set of theatrical legs, as it deserves. But I want you to look at the split here. 109 million domestically and 324 million internationally. And that international figure only included about $39 million, just a little over 10%, from China. What's interesting to me about those numbers is that internationally at that point, just like here in the States, theaters were really just starting to come out of the lockdowns still, even more so internationally than they were here in the US and Canada. So to turn in a $324 million performance with China only being about 11 or 12% of that is very admirable. Now, I don't know if we're going to have a 3-to-1 ratio again, international versus domestic on Dune 2. We shouldn't, because Dune 2 is now exclusively in theaters and not day and date on a streaming service. But even if it doesn't hang around there and maybe goes 2-to-1, we're still talking about a movie with Dune 2 that should easily be able to push towards 800 million globally. And given the production budget and presumed marketing spend on this film, it only needs about 600 million globally to smack a break-even point. Everything past that in the theater, and then of course after in streaming and PVOD sales, will be pure gravy. Whether or not it gets there is a story that will be written over the next few weeks, but with a start like this and the fact that this movie is very unlikely to be front-loaded like a Marvel film, this is going to leg out a lot better. If this were a Marvel movie with a $178 million opening weekend, you could pretty much set your watch by the fact that it would wind up closing down somewhere around $450 to maybe $500 million. That's usually what we see, but I don't think that's going to happen here with Dune. I think it's going to look much more like Oppenheimer. But let's talk about, is Dune 2 going to actually turn a profit for Warner Brothers and Legendary? Because again, this is also something that's different than what we see from a Disney film, especially one from its own studios. Avatar, of course, was James Cameron. Disney distributed it. This is very similar to Avatar 2 in that regard. Warner Brothers reportedly has a small, say 10% equity stake in the production cost. So maybe around $20 million of that production budget was footed by Warner Brothers. The rest of it is Legendary. Warner Brothers is a distributor for this film, so that means they're going to get a more traditional distribution fee. So let's say that Dune 2 does wind up at about $800 million at the global box office, and let's say roughly $400 million of that or so will make its way back to Warner Brothers, in this case, as distributor. Warner Brothers would recoup somewhere around 25 to 30%, maybe $100 to $120 million of that net back to distribution, and that would cover its costs of marketing. So let's say Warner Brothers spent about $100 million globally marketing this film. That distribution fee would go back to paying that down and then turning a profit for Warner. The remaining $300 million or so would be split, with Legendary, in this case, getting around 90% of it, and Warner Brothers getting around 10% of it for their equity stake. Then, of course, there's post-theatrical distribution, with Legendary making some money on that as well, with Warner Brothers paying them for the streaming rights to go on to Max. And then, of course, PVOD sales or premium video on demand, or whatever second or third pay window that goes in behind HBO Max, or Max as it's called now, for streaming on down the road. Also, with a movie like Dune and the audiences that are a little bit different than those of a Marvel piece or a Disney movie, there's probably going to be more physical media sales on average for this film, at least in terms of how many people went to go see it in theaters, and how many of those people, say 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10 people, might actually buy this film on PVOD or physical media once it's available. The trend for a lot of Marvel movies has been see it in the theater if they go see it, and then just wait for it to drop on Disney Plus after, say, 60 to 90 days. Disney has gotten better with stretching that release window out before physical and PVOD to try to give those premium sales a little bit more life before dropping onto streaming, but I think still Dune is going to be a winner here in that department. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you seen Dune Part 2 yet? What did you think about it? And give me your thoughts on what you feel that the box office is going to wind up at once this movie concludes its run. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to come back by later today at 6 p.m. Eastern for our Sunday live show. And until then, take care. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.